Democratic Congressman David Cicilline, who asked Matt Whitaker that very question we just played for you there. Joseph Moreno is a former federal prosecutor. Elise Jordan is an MSNBC political analyst. And Michael Schmidt, who co-wrote that story in the New York Times, he joins me now by phone. Michael, let me start with you. This is your reporting that you and your colleagues reporting that we're talking about here. So, well, first of all, just on that exchange right there that we played from the hearings a couple weeks ago with Whitaker, Whitaker asked if anybody at the White House reached out to him to express dissatisfaction with the way the Cohen case was being handled. Is your reporting that dissatisfaction was expressed to him?
Correct. It shows that there was discussions that went on between Whitaker and the president. The president obviously concerned about the direction of the investigation and looking at the possibilities and what could be done in terms of that, and turning to someone in the U.S. Attorney, Berman, in the hopes that whatever relationship they had or whatever loyalty he thought Berman may have to him may be important. In the entire story in which we've looked at obstruction going all the way back to 2017, there are these different themes, and one of them is loyalty. The president wants loyalty from those who are overseeing the investigations into him, whether it was Jeff Sessions, whether it was Jim Comey, whether it was Andy McCabe, who was going to be the interim FBI director, and whether it's the acting attorney general or this investigation in New York. This is something that's incredibly important to the president. He believes and has said that it is his view that the investigators should be more loyal to him than to following the facts and the rule of law.
So Michael, just to get the sequence of events straight here, the Cohen case, what you're reporting on here is playing out. The Cohen case is going on. The president goes to his acting attorney general, Whitaker, and he says he makes a request to put in a new prosecutor, to put Berman, Trump's ally, in charge of the prosecution of Cohen. What is the response that comes back to Trump, and what's the exchange there?
Well, Berman, nothing changed. Nothing came of it. And this is sort of a theme that happens a lot of times with Trump and obstruction, where he tries to do something. He tries to get Jim Comey to end the Flynn investigation. He tries, in this case, to talk to Whitaker about having Berman unrecuse himself. And he ultimately fails, and he sort of sours on Whitaker. Whitaker falls out of favor with the president. The president sees Whitaker as someone who can't do the things that he hoped he'd be able to at the Justice Department, sort of the limitations of even being an acting attorney general, which you think would be a very powerful position. And this is another thing, is the president tries different times to get different folks to go along with, whether it was installing loyalists here or there, and has not always been successful and has struggled to damage the investigation.
Do you have reporting? Is your reporting that when Trump was told no about getting Berman in charge of this investigation, that when that didn't happen, you say he soured on Whitaker? Did he express that explicitly to him, that there's a connection there? Gee, you let me down on this. You didn't come through on this. I expected to have Berman in there.
I don't know that. We don't know that in our reporting. We don't know that the president made that point directly to Whitaker. And I guess it remains to be seen what will happen with Whitaker. He is actually still at the Justice Department in an advisory role under the new Attorney General. And Whitaker is someone who really has spent a lot of time appealing to the president. He started on television many, many months ago advocating against the Mueller investigation. Then after Sessions being fired, put in as the acting attorney general. The president had high hopes on that. And by the time he left at the end of the investigation, from at least what we know publicly, everything remained intact.
All right, Joe, so you've got this situation here where the president has there's this investigation going on of Cohen. We see what that ultimately led to. So it is ominous for the president, clearly, as it's going on. He wants to get somebody he thinks is an ally, somebody he thinks is a loyalist installed there. That guy has been recused from the case. So the suggestion there is, okay, this reflects potential obstruction on the president's part. The fact that he didn't get his way, though, does that take obstruction off the table in that situation?
Short answer is no. Okay, and this is the parallel to the James Comey situation, right? I mean, the president may have thought that by firing James Comey, he would have stopped the Russia investigation. It didn't. That doesn't change the fact that he thought he was putting something into motion that may have had a corrupt intent behind it. So it's really a parallel, and there is a pattern here, as we can see. So no, obstruction is not off the table because you can have an attempted obstruction. You don't have to.
I guess how could you? What would it take to prove or to establish something like that? If what could come back at you is, hey, he's the president. He's not been in government before. He didn't like the investigation. He thought it was unfair. He asked about getting this guy in there, and he was told, no, we can't do that, and it didn't happen.
I think you have a career as a defense lawyer. I mean, you just laid out a great argument there,
so
right?
what would it take then to overcome an argument like that?
So you have to show the actions. You infer someone's intent by their actions, right? So obviously you can't get into their mind, but you can say, why else would they have done these things but for a corrupt purpose? Why would you keep working these internal DOJ levers of power, but not for the fact that you were trying to stymie a DOJ investigation? That's how you do it. You look for a pattern, and then you say, why else would someone take these actions if they weren't trying to do something that was corrupt?
Let me bring the congressman in here, David Cicilline from Rhode Island. We played that exchange you had with Matthew Whitaker when he was the acting attorney general there a couple weeks ago. What is your reaction to that now? How do you look at that response you got right now?
Well, I think it's pretty clear that Matthew Whitaker's testimony and the reporting, this explosive reporting, cannot both be true. Mr. Whitaker evaded important answers. He clearly tried to create the impression that he was not influenced by the president. We asked him repeatedly, did the president or anyone on the president's behalf express any dissatisfaction? He said no. Clearly, the change of counsel at the Southern District of New York was not to reward the U.S. attorney there, but because the president was dissatisfied. So it's hard to believe that was done for any other reason than because the president was frustrated about the direction. But this is a pattern. This is a president who thinks the attorney general, U.S. attorneys, other members of the Justice Department have a loyalty or a responsibility to protect him. They take a loyalty and an oath to the Constitution of the United States. He fundamentally misunderstands this from the very beginning, with Jeff Sessions' recusal to his effort to fire Mr. Mueller to this recent reporting about trying to change out the U.S. attorney. This is a president who continues to think that these individuals owe a loyalty to him and have a duty to protect him. They have a duty to protect the Constitution, and they're doing their job, and the president should understand that it is inappropriate and may constitute obstruction of justice to attempt to interfere with their work.
Do you have plans, do you now have plans, your committee, to follow up at all with Whitaker?
Yes. I mean, we attempted to get information from Mr. Whitaker about exactly what he heard from the president, what direction he was given. He refused to disclose conversations with the president, but he certainly created the impression that no one expressed any dissatisfaction with what was happening with Mr. Cohen's plea and the identification of individual one. We have many more questions. The chairman of the committee sent a letter to him already seeking clarification based on what we've learned subsequent to his testimony, and indicating to him that he's either going to provide that clarification or he should expect to come back before the committee in a sworn deposition to answer our questions so we can get the truth.
Okay, another episode in this reporting we're talking about tonight from the New York Times. It occurred when former White House press secretary Sean Spicer briefed the press about the resignation of Trump's former national security advisor, Michael Flynn. According to the Times, White House lawyers had told Spicer what to say. However, quote, when Mr. Spicer's briefing began, the lawyers started hearing numerous misstatements, some bigger than others, and ended up compiling them all in a memo. The lawyers' main concern was that Mr. Spicer overstated how exhaustively the White House had investigated Mr. Flynn, and what he said wrongly, that administration lawyers had concluded there were no legal issues surrounding Mr. Flynn's conduct. Elise, you know a little bit about the inner workings of government, of the White House. The scene there described with Spicer, the president deciding, it seems, that this is my story, Spicer going on. What did you make of that?
Well, any careful press operative wouldn't want to be on the record saying something that could put themselves in personal legal jeopardy. And you look at Sean Spicer had a flagrant disregard for the truth during his entire tenure as press secretary. But it really seems like in this particular instance, he was taking pains to go further than even the White House counsel's office was comfortable with, which is clearly a huge problem for the White House and possibly for Mr. Spicer, but that would be something that you would know more about.
Well, let me just, I think we still have Michael Schmidt on the phone with us. Michael, just in terms of this piece of it, the fact that Spicer went so much further, apparently, per your reporting, as Elise is saying there, what is it that prompted that?
Well, you have to sort of look at it through the frame of what was going on. This was February 14th. Mike Flynn had just been fired, the former national security advisor. This is the first time the administration was confronting the Russia investigation publicly. The White House counsel's office was concerned that Spicer would go out and not give an accurate portrait. And what happened was there were questions about why did it take the White House so long to deal with the Flynn issue after they were told by the Justice Department he had these contacts with the Russian ambassador and could be subject to blackmail. So it is in Spicer telling to the public from the podium of how the White House handled it. The White House counsel's office says, hey, that's a far too favorable account of how this was dealt with. We were not as on top of it as he made it out to be. We haven't made these determinations about Flynn's legal standing. And because of that, they documented it and told him afterwards. Now, the White House never corrected the record on this, but what the feeling was it's one thing to go out and say stuff about crowd sizes that isn't accurate. It's one thing to say stuff on the campaign trail. The White House can't be out on such an important national security investigation not telling the full truth.
Joe, the totality of this story, and I encourage everybody who's watching now and hasn't already gone and read it to read the entire thing, but the totality of it suggests a possible set of avenues that could be used to make a case of obstruction of justice against the president. Another defense that is suggested in this story from the White House's standpoint is basically that the president has been very public about his dissatisfaction with all of this, with all of the investigations that have been swirling, with a sense that he feels he's the victim of a witch hunt, he's the victim of out-of-control prosecutors. The fact that he has been articulating all of this in public while doing all of this in private that's being revealed here, does that have any bearing, again, on this issue of obstruction?
Well, it's an interesting point, right? Because you can see some of these public statements. Had they not been made in public, but instead were in a text message or an email or a memo or a private conversation, they would sound horrible, right? I mean, what you would do with information like that. And yet, the fact that it's tweeted to tens of millions of people, it somewhat seems to negate it. But at the end of the day, it shouldn't make a difference, right? I mean, if you're making those statements, and those statements have an intended effect, whether it's to stymie or impede or intimidate an investigation or shut something down or tamp down political enemies, it has the desired effects. So it definitely adds a different kind of spin because you don't think of obstruction as something that's done in plain sight. But at the end of the day, if it has the intended intent, if it has possibly the intended effect, that could be the basis of your case.
All right. Well, thank you to Congressman David Cicilline from Rhode Island, Joseph Moreno, Elise Jordan, Michael Schmidt joining us on the phone again with that reporting. Michael, thank you for taking a few minutes.